I love furries because they're always surprising me with new modes of thinking, because who else would want to read a fantasy adventure where the protagonist is constantly rolling his eyes, pinching his brow, and being as huffy as possible? I'm not talking about any Chad isekai protagonists who are too cool for it all, or fanfics where we make Squidward a magical girl. I'm talking about Pit Fighters, the light novel series by Rick Griffin. The protagonist is a purple rabbit who delights the audience by facing all of his problems with a, "This sucks, I don't wanna." This little twerp never stops whining, so I am completely lost on who this is appealing to, because his poutiness isn't done in a way that's played for cool points comedy or step one of his babyfication. I read all 4 Pit Fighters books because it won the community poll, and today I'm giving a full spoiler review of the series. I'm hoping we can figure out the series' appeal along the way because it was completely lost on me. Which is especially frustrating since you could describe these light novels as, what if Megalobox had characters that belong on E621? Which sounds like something grown in a lab for me to specifically enjoy, but I absolutely, unquestionably hated this series. I'm also carefully considering the comments I received on my last Rick Griffin review. This one in particular was extra hilarious. BlackLightJack says this video is garbage, and so are you. If the only thing you managed to gather from this slice of life comic was Christians are dumb, atheism is the best, then you are not mentally equipped to be making critical videos. Your aggressively hostile tone throughout this video really isn't helping either. Thank you for the input, BlackLightJack. I'm gonna take that comment to heart and make this review even meaner and dumber, because last I checked, you don't need a degree to give an opinion. YouTube didn't ask for my GED before I hit upload. I've had a lifetime of being dismissed as slow. I am not stopping now, so I will be as stupid and hostile as I goddamn please! So the story opens with all of the characters sitting around a TV, watching Pit Fighters. It's not clear if this takes place in the morning or in the afternoon, but I really wish these characters could enjoy some Magic Mind. Magic Mind is a mental performance shot designed for focused, calm energy, crafted for long-term benefits. We live in an age where distractions are accepted as a normal part of life, but they don't have to be a part of your life. You can reject this baloney mindset that you need to be stressed out to be successful. You could be efficient and productive without feeling totally fritzed out. What's cool about Magic Mind is it's designed to give you a good boost when you first take it, but some of the ingredients take 3 to 4 days to reach their full effect. So don't think of it as a quick fix. This is about setting you up for a better long term. And Magic Mind is not coming for your coffee. It is not a coffee replacement. If you're a big coffee guy, it's recommended you incorporate Magic Mind into your AM routine. The L-theanine in Magic Mind helps your coffee last all day. I'll be real, I know I'm going to trip over myself if I try to explain that. Luckily, over at the Magic Mind blog, they've explained the science behind Magic Mind way better. Every ingredient has over 200 scientific studies backing it. They've shown their work. And speaking personally, it's made a huge difference in my life. Magic Mind has helped me lock in, get my work done, so I'm not dragging my feet and talking with a sad bear voice all day. If you're interested, I encourage you to give it a try. Magic Mind ships to 65 countries and offers a 100-day, 100% refund. And to sweeten the deal, my affiliate link is going to give you up to 48% off your first subscription for the next 10 days, or 20% off of a one-time purchase. Over at magicmind.com/taperclipjan20, my code taperclipjan20 will get you that discount. That's spelled TAPIRCLIPJAN20 for up to 48% off your first subscription for the next 10 days, or 20% off of a one-time purchase. Link is going to be in the description and pinned comment. Thank you, Magic Mind, for sponsoring this video. You guys are the best. And now, on to the review. So this story takes a while to actually get started. Protagonist Paris is hanging out with his brothers watching Pit Fighters, and the conversation turns to how capital G gay the entire sport is. It's the same way wrestling or MMA has an increased arrow appeal if you're into beefy dudes. Paris gets a nosebleed watching a celebrity crush, Sultan the Kangaroo, in a Pit Fighters match. We then hard cut to Paris's mother tending to him, like a real hard cut. I was wondering if this was a misprinted ebook. So the scene goes like this. "Holy crap, that leg lock," Connor said, his jaw dropping. "Admit it," Blitz said, turning to his brothers. "That's just blatant homoeroticism." He only spotted Connor. "Paris?" Connor turned too, and they noted Paris had fallen backwards onto the red slab deck of the cafe. His tongue lolled out like a bloated with blood down both of his mussy violet cheeks. "Should we get Mom?" Connor asked, looking up towards the doors to the grocer. He'll be okay," Blitz said, finishing his drink. "They'll get his unfinished smoothie and press it between his legs before he really embarrasses himself." Then there's a picture of Paris passed out with his 2 brothers looking at him, and here's the next page. Mom, no, it's fine, Paris sputtered as he wiped his cheeks with a tongue-dabbed napkin. I'm almost 20, I can do it myself. Tyree, shorter and rounder than any of her boys, sighed and stroked her hand over Paris's ruffled head and down his ears. Paris looked down and away, embarrassed. Behind them, Blitz and Connor both loaded the groceries into the handcart for the trip back uptown. Hon, this pent-up energy is driving you nuts, Tyree said. As much as it aggravate your father, you're in need of a husband. Believe me, I know, Paris said. Sorry, their voices are so similar. I'm bad at voices. Why don't you go to the school social with Connor tonight? She said. I'm sure there'll be cute guys there. It's just so hard to talk to people. I'll just make an idiot of myself, and nobody finds that attractive. You just need to work on your self-confidence. Tyree embraced Paris. Yeah, maybe, Paris groaned, eyes shifting towards the people out on the plaza, hoping it was nobody he knew. Tyree licked her thumb and rubbed it across Paris's cheek. Paris flailed his arms, pushing her away. Mom, I said... Blitz giggled. Mama's boy. Blitz, hun, there's nothing wrong with being special to your mother, Tyree scolded. Yes, there is, Paris exclaimed, flailing away from Tyree until he fell backwards again, right on his tail. Ow! Blitz burst out laughing. Stop it, Paris shouted. Mom, make him stop! End quote. Anyway, this scene transition did confuse me. I would start it with Paris woke up to the sight of his mother wiping his cheek with a tongue-dabbed napkin. There isn't a new chapter or section break. I assumed the page with the brothers ended early because of the accompanying illustration. Now that I've looked it over, I see what they were going for, but if you were listening to this as an audiobook without the illustration to break it up, it would not make sense. So I assumed there was a formatting issue, but it's actually just Rick Griffin boldly assuming that you knew about his special formatting. Anyway, the adorable sibling moment continues, which is followed by another confusing, jarring cut to a new scene. This one has a page break, which is marginally better, but I still would have gone for a more clear section break or new chapter. I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, but I don't understand how a book makes this mistake, especially more than once. As a reader, I'm having to take extra steps to mentally process your story and piece together something that should not be a problem to begin with. I didn't see any editors listed, and this was published on Smashwords, so it's completely believable that Rick Griffin banged this out and put it for sale without getting good enough beta readers who would process this as a potential problem. And I know this is author incompetence, and I have every right to make a stink about this, since starting in book 2, he started adding section breaks. So the next scene starts at a college party, which has a similar formatting issue that threw me off, and Paris is more cheesed off than me. The text tells us, Paris was certain having to wear the puffy formal clothes for the school social was his punishment. He felt at least 3 decades out of place in a location where being 6 weeks out of fashion was reputation destroying. There was some salvageable statements in being retro with the high collar and loose cuff pants, but he didn't even like wearing clothes at appropriate times. The weather of St. Martin Cristo prevented the need for any clothing at any point of the year, and yet tradition and formality rules still lingered. End quote. Okay, Rick Griffin has a thing about nudity. If any of his fans managed to find this video, maybe you could explain this nudity fascination in the comment section. I have zero interest in digging through this dude's Twitter to find his manifesto. In Rick Griffin's webcomic, The A&H Club, none of the characters wear pants because he wanted to make it fun. It resulted in fashion choices that felt flatly uncanny. If you think of classic cartoon characters like Donald Duck or Chip and Dale, they're drawn very cute and cartoony, so I'm not thinking of the nudity implications when I see these characters. They're just funny little guys. But Rick Griffin's style renders bodies with a touch of realism, so it's jarring to see this body style with only a shirt. And it's even more confusing when characters say they want to get dressed up, but the commitment to no pants has such a stranglehold on the style that I'm looking at them like, okay, but like, how is this dressed up? This looks like you chopped a dress in half. So if the characters were wearing a dress, it would feel fancy, but they're not wearing a dress, so I don't know what to make of it. I know autism gets thrown around a lot with furry webcomics, but this strict adherence to the no pants rule, regardless of design aesthetics, did make this feel autistic in a way I had not encountered before. In the series Pit Fighters, nudity is normal for the pit fighters. There's a scene later in the series where the characters get on a trolley, and although the main group is nude, we see they're with clothed passengers, and it's not a big deal. A handful of characters wear next to nothing. For example, the protagonist's mom wears only a poncho. Now, this chapter is the most this series discusses these social norms regarding clothes. A little later in the chapter, we're told this. Connor pulled away from the wall and sauntered up between a doe and a mouse who were talking with a ewe, sheared underneath her thin toga. How did this even count as clothing? Paris was certain the requirements had something to do with covering and nip, but whatever it was, nobody besides old-timers and stuffy politicians took the taboo all that serious anymore. All the girls' clothes were so sheer, they might as well have worn nothing. End quote. It would seem straightforward. Clothes represent an oppressive, old-fashioned mindset, while nudity is an enlightened step forward. I understand that, but we still see Rick Griffin's terrible fashion choices, much like the A&H Club, peppering this series' illustration art. The most common outfit seems to be a big loose poncho with a belt, but we also see men with oddly fitting crop tops, and when protagonist Paris gets a side job in book 3, his work uniform is only a vest. I'm wondering if this is in the same universe as the A&H Club, and if there's a greater societal progression towards nudism normalization woven throughout his series. Either way, I kind of hate it. We hear a lot about the characters' ding-dongs, but he's not drawing them, so I'm wondering if the illustrations are abstracted from the text or if everything's conveniently hidden behind the character's floof. Much like the A&H Club, this puts their world in an uncanny valley, and I hate it. However, unlike the A&H Club, there's less of a feeling of being arbitrarily locked into the no pants rule, so this was easier to take in from that angle. So there's some small talk at the party. Protagonist Paris sees a cute guy and decides to shoot his shot. He says, "Hi Paris, I'm Trent. Did you see the Saturday match on Sultan? Amazing end to the tournament season, don't you think?" Paris tried his best to ignore how many of those words were in the wrong order. Trent, being 2 feet taller, glanced down at Paris. "I don't watch Sultan matches. He's monotonous." He took a big swig of his cup. Paris froze there for a solid 5 seconds, watching Trent drink. The mongoose just stared at him and blinked. "Right," Paris said. "Okay, I'm going back into that corner to unalive now." End quote. I guess I have to start making a tier list for the type of cringe dialogue I hate because, wow, putting cringe dialogue in a flirty setting just makes me hate it even more than usual. This is also one of the exceedingly few times the protagonist takes some initiative instead of getting dragged around by the plot, and he's immediately shot down, so dejected that he leaves the party to kick a can down the road. I'm also confused because he's dejected that Trent doesn't watch Sultan's matches, but that doesn't mean that is the end of the conversation. If he says he's not into Sultan, ask him who's his favorite. Ask him who's his pick for the greatest of all time. Ask him if he thinks Sultan could beat Goku. Trent isn't giving Paris much to work with, but dude, you cannot let this ruin your night. After leaving the party in a sour mood, Paris catches sight of a recruitment poster for the pit fighters. He decides that this is it. This is his calling. He's gonna go for it. But not before telling his mom, and there's a whole lot of back and forth that does not need to happen. It's like, I get it, the dude loves his mom, can we hurry it up already? So Mama Rabbit gives her blessing and we cut to Paris shuffling into a pit fighter's office. Which is where this story should have started, day 1 of our protagonist becoming a pit fighter. I don't need the sport explained to me. It's called Pit Fighters, and if you watch it, you're gay. There, I saved you the first 35% of this goddamn book. So Mac, a big burly man bear wearing a dumpy sports bra, is here to show Paris around. After Paris passes the physical, Mac tells Paris he's in. It's only a matter of Paris deciding if what he sees is convincing enough to join. They pass by a closed-circuit TV showing a pit fighters match, and I hated the way the story draws attention to this. The text reads, Paris watched 2 fighters in a sparring match, a horse versus an alligator half again his size. They traded blows, fist against fist, arm against arm, a deft dodge of a tail sweep. "Go, go, go!" Paris squealed, bouncing up and down as he watched the exchange, before Mac had to pull him away. "There'll be plenty of time for that later," the bear said. "Aw, but, end quote. What is the point of this? To show that Paris is easily distracted? We already know he's a Pit Fighters fanboy. That was in the first 35% of the book I would have cut out. This moment was so irritating. I already see this character as bewilderingly unattractive. Now he's bopping around like an untrained chihuahua, and good luck getting your audience excited about that. I'm also confused because he's here, in the Pit Fighters facility. Why is he getting so hung up on something he's seeing on TV? This is his big introduction to this new world, and this numbskull wants to gawk at a TV. This isn't a dentist's office waiting room where the only thing to pass the time is some unnecessary audiovisual stimuli imposing on the environment. So the tour continues, and Paris learns that a lot of the fighters joined to hook up, which inexplicably comes as a total shock to Paris, which I also find very hard to believe. So now I'm wondering if Paris is deliberately written to be naive. The story makes a big stink about how he's very directionless and doesn't know what to do in life, but that's something very different from being unaware. So here's what the story tells us. It would surprise you how many guys join up more interested in than fighting. Paris perked his ears, then let them fall again as he realized how that made him look. Does that happen a lot? What? Sex. Mac looked Paris up and down even more than he had in the checkup room. Then his grin grew broader. Paris's heart seized up and jumped all over the place. He couldn't help it. He panicked, turned around, and ran out the door. Down the hall Mac had led him through. He was at the double doorways that led to the main lobby, where Mac overtook him and stood between Paris and escape. Paris, babe, he said, holding an enormous paw up. What's the holdup? I can't do that, Paris confessed. I don't even know how to talk to guys. What am I thinking? I'm saving myself for marriage. Mom will think I'm a Paris the they'll call me. Paris hyperventilated. Okay, side note, would your mom actually say that? She's been totally supportive of you being gay. She supported you going into pit fighters. She is your biggest fan. I think this is you projecting some puritanical nonsense onto your cool mom. Anyway, the story continues. Listen, if you want to walk away, that's your choice. Mac wrapped an arm around Paris's shoulder and eased him back towards the hallway. But you came here for a reason, right? You find our fighters attractive? My brother says you make it gay on purpose, Paris said, sunken. Oh, definitely, Mac said. It's popular with women and our demographic. Paris looked up at Mac, ears in surprise so quick they bapped Mac on the chin. You're gay too? Hon, I'll pay you 1,000 dracs if you could find a fighter here who isn't at least male inclined. Paris blinked. He hadn't even considered that. That'd make dating easier. As much as the island accepted it, St. Martin Cristo wasn't known for its broad gay scene, but apparently a large chunk of them ended up here. Who knew? But there were always anxieties Paris had about such a situation, to the point he'd shield away from ever pursuing it. The thought of being used, abused, suffering consequences for it filled him with nervous terror. It was why he told his mother he would find a husband, rather than a series of lays like Blitz did. It seemed so much safer. End quote. Anyway, Mac reassures Paris that there's no diseases since all of the fighters get regular checkups, top-rate medical care, and they have access to a super sanitizer, PACAD, that gets rid of any diseases. It works so well that the fighters use it as lubricant. We're also introduced to Biomender Gel, a super medicine that speeds up the recovery process so fighters can use that and be back on their feet ready to fight even after gnarlier injuries. Once Paris takes in all of the sights, here's what he has to say. I need to get over myself. No running away from this. Not this time. I knew it would be dangerous, and it's not even all that dangerous in the long run, right? Fastest way to learn to swim is jump off the deep end. That's the spirit. Mac patted Paris's shoulder. Let's go to my office and sign the paperwork. Unless you want to try out the green goo like I said. Paris flushed, his ears burning hot. I'll work my way up to that, he said. But the deep end, Mac reminded him with a wag of his finger. I didn't mean that part, Paris said, pushing Mac away at once. Mac laughed. End quote. We then get another jarring cut back to Paris and his mom. Gotta make sure the mom knows what's going on. There's a goodbye scene between the two, and we jump ahead to Paris's return to the pit fighter storm. He learns the lowest rank is a lot scuzzier than the facilities he saw on his tour, and he meets his roommate, Logan the Deer. I found their introduction legitimately hilarious, but it's the kind of spicy talk that would get this video demonetized, so if you want to hear me read that, I did a members only video where I read over that scene. Link is going to be in the description, and yes, I do stupid cartoon voices the entire time, despite it being supposedly sensual. You're welcome. Anyway, Paris learns that the contract he signed has a lot of sneaky fine print. He's now got a crazy amount of debt with the pit fighters, and there's a lot of baloney designed to make the fighters stay in debt and keep them with the pit fighters. This throws Paris into deep zetsubo, but he recovers when venting to Logan the Deer, and he learns that his celebrity crush, Sultan the Kangaroo, is open to hook and has slept with a lot of the pit fighters. Paris realizes he has a legitimate chance at getting intimate with his crush, which is something to look forward to. Logan the Deer pushes Paris into sleeping with him, Paris refuses since he's mostly a virgin. The two go for a shower before the big training match starts. Things get very bromantic as the two share a shower, but it's only so they're not charged extra shower time. Paris realizes that since he'll be sleeping in a room that resembles the Squid Game dorm, and there's constant hookups, all of that bed squeaking is gonna keep him up. I don't know if I was supposed to hit the laugh track sound effect over this, or if this is supposed to make me rock hard, but I hated it. And this moment set the overall temperature for the sexuality in this series. It's a world with constant overt sexuality, and our protagonist wants nothing to do with that. I'll be real, I don't get it. This is a polyamorous, free-for-all fantasy, a world of men in the best shape of their life without any worry of STDs, in a culture that accepts and encourages the hankiest of pankiest. But our protagonist is just pouting like, wah, I don't wanna, this sucks. This is the last person you'd want in a free love environment, so I'm wondering why the hell he's here. I know his contract says he can't just leave, but I'm thinking of it more from the angle of someone who enjoys harem anime. It's not like he has the one-itis and promised to his lover back home. It's not like he's in a harem, and if he picks one, it would hurt the other harem members' feelings. In Trixie the Golden Witch's long-form analysis of the Asterisks Wars, a terrible sci-fi light novel anime adaptation, she highlights a scene where protagonist Ayato scrambles away from the student council president who's making advances towards him. The gist of it is, although there's no real reason for Ayato to turn her down, this is a series written for the romantically inexperienced. So Ayato's mindset needs to align with the readers who are interested in girls, but they don't know how to approach them. So you get scenes where the protagonist is surrounded by opportunity, but he still needs to reject it, so he stays in that gray area, because if he made tangible progress with a girl, then that would make him too distant from the target audience. I wonder if something similar is happening here. Is the target demographic for pit fighters gay guys who are aware that gay culture is very promiscuous, but they feel uneasy about it, so they have a hesitation over their participation? Much like Ayato, Paris's hangups are entirely psychological, but I'd argue that Paris's mindset makes a bit more sense than Ayato's. However, I'm more annoyed at pit fighters' S-word repulsion because something about it felt too real. Whereas Asterisks Wars was a very safe fantasy. It's often said that it's easy to in gay culture because the supply is the demand, but like, I don't know. Why does everyone on the Bark app write, I don't want I want to find love? It's like, yeah, so does everyone here. All the guys looking for an easy lay are over on Grindr. Get over yourself. As the most perfectly centrist YouTuber, I could say I empathize with Ayato scrambling away from advances, and I've met gay guys with Paris's mindset. Draw whatever conclusions you want about me based on that. My point is, I have a very limited tolerance for shaming in the gay community because even if you're not living life like you're trying to recreate Studio 54, I have this sense of like, come on, man, don't be a judgeroo. Shouldn't you know that's like bad after so many people have judged your lifestyle? And in all fairness to pit fighters, Paris does eventually get over this, but it's in the last few pages of the series. It's the kind of rushed wrap-up you'd see from a serialized work that was abruptly canceled. So I can't take this as an author crafting a flawed protagonist with an emotional shortcoming he works his way through, since he overcomes this flaw so suddenly. So I'm taking Paris for the shamer he is, since that is his mindset for 91.74% of the entire series. If Paris was a notch more insane, I would root for him harder, even if he's walking around with all of this internalized homophobia and sexual anxiety. Because I don't need to morally agree with a protagonist for them to be a good protagonist. And I'll put that in big text on the screen so my point is crystal clear. I don't need to morally agree with the protagonist for them to be a good protagonist. The first thing I would change is make his celebrity crush his main motivation. He could still get embarrassed whenever someone brings up Sultan the Kangaroo, and his default response could be timidly touching his index fingers together and turning into an uwu moe blob. But imagine if Paris's internal motivation and mindset is, I am signing up for pit fighters because I want to Sultan. He can still get shy whenever someone brings up Sultan, but I want his internal dialogue to be him repeating to himself, I'm doing this to meet Sultan. Because right now our protagonist is completely directionless and has no interest in the pit fighters culture. Another angle I would add to Paris is I want his negative attitude to mean something. What if part of his crazy fanboy motivation includes diving into the pit fighter scene, being acutely aware of their culture, and what if he's thinking, sure, Sultan's had a lot of partners, but he's never had anyone who loved him. And he's thinking, well, once he spends time with me, he'll have no interest in casual hookups, and his quest is to quote-unquote tame Sultan and turn him monogamous, which is evil. I'll say it again, and make myself as clear as possible. I don't agree with that mindset and think it's bad, but adding that twist to Paris would make him way more interesting. But enough with the fanfiction. Book 2 begins with Paris' protagonist getting ready for his first training match. The referee, Dana, explains to Paris, and by extension the audience, the different intricacies of the pit fighters ranking system and training matches. It isn't anything more mind-blowing than the NEN system, so don't worry about learning this shonen power battle system. Logan the deer dotes on Paris, tying up his ears, slapping his The other boys make snide comments about them being a little fruity, which is rich, considering how we've established this entire sport is gayer than a conga line at a Madonna concert. Paris is chosen to square off against a bully Skunk, Porte, and Paris laments, "Why me?" And I'm just like, yeah, why you, Paris? Why do you continuously get such terrible luck? I can count on one hand the number of times you've actively made your own choice throughout this series. The text gives us a crash course in helplessness. Now we have our 2 volunteers. Let's get started with the practice bout. Come on, Bunny, Thunderbutt. Paris jumps, startled, having convinced him that Dinah had forgotten him. Why me? Paris exclaimed. Dinah turned and stared right at him. Because you are talking over me. Come on, we're breaking in everyone. Paris froze. This must have been that fight or flight response he'd heard so much about. Despite the name, he didn't get to choose his preference of fighting or flighting. Still, the crowd behind him chanted, "Do it, do it, do it," and Logan lifted him up to stand. "Go get him," Logan exclaimed, slapping Paris on the ass. Paris yelped and leaped into the center of the ring, rubbing his tush and giving Logan the evil eye. Logan grinned with his palms turned out not so innocently. Paris stumbled next to Porte. Porte wasn't as tall as Logan or Dinah, but still a solid head above Paris, so that Paris looked right at the skunk's shoulder and neck. Despite the bragging and grandstanding, God or the devil had blessed this guy with tight pecs, abs, shoulders, just everything. Was he a rich kid? A spoiled brat? But jacked, with an ass to back that up. Paris would have loved to watch him fight, but how was anyone supposed to fight such a vainglorious work of art? Porte looked down at Paris and snorted, before his lips parted in a seedy grin. This'll be fun, he said. Paris swallowed. End quote. So Paris gets his butt kicked by Porte the skunk, prompting Logan the deer to dote on him even more. The two watch Porte's next match, and for round 2 he's fighting against Kinny the possum. Kinny the possum surprisingly wins, and Porte's lackeys tend to him with some biomender gel. But Porte says this is no bueno, since you're supposed to use it sparingly, since, quote, we're not made out of money. It pissed me off. Like, bro, we're going into this world of crazy medical advancements, but it just exists so the characters have yet another reason to pitch a fit about their money problems. We already know everyone is in a crazy amount of debt with little hope of escaping from the time they signed their contract. Is there anything in the world of pit fighters that doesn't exist just to bum the characters out over their financial woes? I get that this is supposed to be a crazy messed up world, and wow, it's like so sick and twisted that this sport everyone loves is bad, actually. The characters predominantly flip back and forth between worrying about money and the sort of on main that's normal for gay spaces. My problem is the protagonist doesn't vibe with everyone else's energy, so the never feels particularly fun. It's just got that stank without the fun of diving in and enjoying it. And the financial angle never goes too deep either. The characters are committed to indentured servitude, but the attitude is mostly a huff and a "this sucks." I don't see anything deeper going on besides immense dissatisfaction, which, yeah, that's appropriate for the scenario, but it felt like it was lacking the deeper pain someone would feel in such a dire situation. The thing is, you don't need characters to express a deep pain if the point is to show a fun, sexy adventure. Imagine a perfectly adequate 6 out of 10 ecchi anime about your everyday Joe Tanaka inheriting a maid, and now he's living with a beautiful woman? What? If the story starts to get into how Maid-chan's life is actually super messed up that she's living in indentured servitude, that will likely come later. We first need to sell the audience on the fan service and fun of the fantasy and make them love the main character. Or just don't address it, and hack review channels can make a clickbait video about the capitalist dystopia of Tanaka Joe no Meido Magiku, because both the sexuality and the class despair in pit fighters are so undercooked, it fails at both, so it can't give me anything fun on the side, and it can't offer a deeper meditation on its capitalist critique. We do get a little insight to how the characters feel about their exploitation when Kinny says, "We're here to beat out of one another, to entertain people who don't realize just how exploited they are. And for the rich, because neither of you realize that, you two are stuck here and will die here." End quote. But anything other than the characters huffing and going, "Dish dinks," doesn't seem to happen, as far as I can remember. I won't finger wag over how this needed to be more thoughtful over class struggle, because, again, maybe that's not the story he wanted to write. But it is lacking in emotional depth, and there's only so much anyone wants to see characters pout and cross their arms over how this is so unfair. We get a touch more on class dynamics when, in book 3, the protagonist meets Sultan the kangaroo, and he has a line about how pit fighters is really fun for him since he's at the top, and the advertisers twist his words, and he really wishes they wouldn't do that. Book 4 ends with the protagonist telling his mom about the dang dirty tricks in his contract, and the mom is now determined to get him out, but the series ends there, so it becomes one of those vague, "the adventure continues" cliffhanger endings. This is just spiraling the drain, telling us that this is a no good, gosh darn dirty system. But it's not interested in offering solutions to this corporate corruption or deeper commentary on worker exploitation. It's just licking its wounds, reveling in misery. If I may temporarily jump ahead to book 4, that book begins with a training montage showing that now Paris is used to the world of pit fighters and he started to like the workout routine and fighting and all of that riffraff, which left me with even more confusion. Is this supposed to be one of those r/exercise out of depression success stories? Or is this supposed to be one of those make the best of a bad situation? Is the lesson here that if we exploit the poor, the good ones will fall into place and eventually be happy, so let's just continue to uphold the system as it is? Okay, and I know that last one is the least charitable way to interpret this work, but you've given me so little to work with. Paris himself isn't even sure what's going on. This is what the text tells us. And one day, to his surprise, he wasn't miserable. Logan had showed him how to stand up and breathe. Paris was now taking deeper breaths out of habit. Their afternoon runs had gone from 1 kilometer to 5, and Kinny was pushing for 10. Paris's rapid pulse had lowered. He started to like feeling sore for some godforsaken reason. End quote. No, dude, no. I want you to tell me. Don't just say it's for some godforsaken reason. Okay, wouldn't it be cool if Paris had this revelation like, okay, if I work my way up and become the best pit fighter, then when I quit, I'm going to make a tell-all expose on how the workers are exploited. And now he's got this fire burning in him. He's determined to become the GOAT, and nothing's going to stop him. Now his workouts have a clear purpose, and as a side effect, he realizes that now that he's pushing himself, it makes his body feel better, and his mental state has greatly improved. But I guess telling your mom that this isn't the summer camp adventure you thought it would be works too, I guess. Anyway, back to book 2. Paris, Logan, and Kinny are having lunch, which is a totally gross sludge, by the way, and it costs a whopping 4 dracs. More ways for the big mean system to take their money. It's just awful. Logan reassures him that this stuff's got all the vitamins and nutrients, and everyone here's in great shape, so I don't know, I fail to see the problem here. If this stuff could get you jacked, then why are you crying so damn hard? So there's some back and forth about everyone's story. Kinny challenges Paris to some light sparring, and Kinny deducts that Paris couldn't hit Porte because he was by the bullying. Paris clarifies that he was by Porte's confidence. That's not really an important detail, but again, I do have to point out whenever protagonist Paris shows any bit of initiative. So from this chapter, I'd sum up Kinny's personality as the info dump, cool-headed Megane, but we still see Paris butt in with an astute observation of his own. Before Kinny the possum can leave, Paris slides this into the conversation. Okay. Logan's ears perked right back up. Don't work out too hard. And Kinny, Paris said as he stood. Kinny paused by the canteen door, still chewing a gristly bit of food. You don't need this. I'm not sure you even want this. Why are you here? Kinny looked up at Paris and swallowed his last morsel of food in his mouth. Don't stay up too late. Wiping his wrists over his lips, he walked out the door. End quote. There was nothing about their conversation leading up to that implied that Kinny doesn't need this. So that was such a bizarre thing for the protagonist to say. There was a similar scene in the manga Apple Black, so I absolutely need to raise my hand and interrupt this lecture. During protagonist Sano's first day at wizard school, the class's Bakugo kicks his ass and huffs and puffs and acts like a real bully. The token Magane pulls Sato aside, says some cool reassuring words that gives a little insight to how this world works, and has an immediate read on the situation. But Sato is able to see through Magane-kun, and so he says this. I know, that's why I didn't dodge. This might sound weird coming from someone who's been isolated their whole life, but your looks baffle me. I don't even think you need those glasses. At least I understand Ryuzaki's motives, but you're scarier than Ryuzaki. End quote. By the way, I hate that I was able to recite that by memory. Apple Black is truly a once-in-a-lifetime manga. There's no reason for the bubbly, naive new kid to say this, but it sounds cool, so let's make him say it. This Apple Black scene and the Pit Fighter scene felt remarkably similar. I'm sure when both of these get their anime adaptations, we'll be able to perfectly overlay their dialogue and some bizarro Dark Side of the Oz style crossover for anime tropes. So Paris goes to work out, he sees the gym is too crowded, he goes back to the bunk room and sees the community computer has information about tomorrow's tournament. And wouldn't you know it? But he's going to be facing off against Porte the bully, and just his luck. But Porte shows up and now they're alone. Oh no! So the text indulges us with Porte flirting with Paris, he gets a little too handsy with Paris, and our protagonist has some mixed feelings. Paris wanted to melt and let it happen. He didn't care who Porte was or what he planned. He just wanted that fluffball to use him however he liked. The competition and the pit fighters. This was what he was here for. But, The thinking part of him recognized that this could only create problems. He pulled his lips away from Porte's mouth. Hey, Paris said, this isn't fair. If you want to be domineering over me, whatever, but you shouldn't influence the fights. Porte shook his head and tisked, you poor naive bunny. You don't understand what goes on down here, do you? And how would you? Paris said. You're a rookie, same as me. I've been researching how Pit Fighters operates for 2 years now. I didn't just sign up on a whim because I watched too much TV and thought the guys were cute. Paris's face burned. I didn't join to be the best or to but you get paid via being the best and getting the crap kicked out of you. Best way to get further in debt. And believe me, it gets hard up there. End quote. Porte's quote made me despise Paris' protagonist, Directionless, even more. Because so much of this has been Paris live reacting to this crazy world of pit fighters that's nothing like he saw on TV. But if it's not a particular secret, why can't he know this? What comes to mind are stories of the Olympic Village. Big sporting events have a lot of corruption, and I won't act like I know too much about the economic or human rights side of the equation, because I predominantly know the Olympics as a family-friendly sporting event, much like pit fighters' public image. It's also an open secret that there is a lot of banging going on at the Olympic Village, since it's a bunch of people at peak physical performance living in close quarters with a bunch of other people at peak physical performance. A few years ago, I saw that headline about the rickety beds. I'm sure you did too, but I know there's way more to this than the headline lets on. I can't help but feel like Pit Fighters is missing out on a huge opportunity to explore this unique setting and how sexuality manifests in such an environment. Most sports animes can't explore the homosocial bonds beyond a simple, they were rivals and teammates till the very end. Pit Fighters is an openly gay world with overt sexuality, but it's not doing anything particularly interesting with its setting. So the scene continues and Porte non-cannily goes farther with Paris, and I need to point out this paragraph. He didn't like Porte, but that was not a deal breaker. Besides, it was just an HJ, right? That would change nothing. End quote. 3 out of 4 of those sentences end in an exclamation mark. The writing in this book has felt mostly adequate and passable for light novel writing, but every once in a while we are hit with something like this, where the characters are yelling, because wow, something crazy's happening, we gotta yell, show how nutso this is, whoa! So Paris goes down to the gym to vent his frustration over getting non-conned, and Logan the Deer finds him. He suggests that Paris should goon to get over his attraction to Porte, so he won't have any problems fighting him tomorrow. I'll be real, this is positing a lot about and sexuality that I don't totally understand, and I don't mean just raising an eyebrow over the author's preference, I mean like sociologically, ? Maybe that's the right word for it. Being attracted to your assaulter is a can of worms that I don't totally understand. It's one of those delicate subjects that can happen in real life, and writing about it can be very empowering, but it can still piss people off since the attitude of, ooh, you secretly liked it, can have a lot of troubling implications. If anyone has insight on how fiction approaches the subject, I would deeply appreciate if you leave a comment nudging me in whichever direction you think will leave me a better informed taper. Or just send me your list of top 10 hottest Bakugo and Deku fanfics, that works too. Anyway, it's Paris' protagonist's first big tournament, and he's still got the jitters over facing off against Porte the Bully, but Logan the Deer has some key insights that'll help Paris' protagonist win. Logan tells Paris to just imagine that Porte the Bully is one of his brothers. And once Paris makes that mental shift, suddenly he's able to go certifiably ham on Porte. It was such a stupid resolution to the problem, especially since Porte continues to be a jerk throughout the series, and Paris doesn't do this again. Paris' next match is against Santiago the Capybara, and before the fight starts, we're hit with a "to be continued." Book 3 starts with Paris in the hospital after his fight. He lost. He freaks out over thinking of his hospital bill being added to his already enormous debt with the pit fighters. Kinny the Possum explains all of the ways the pit fighter system is designed to screw over the fighters and keep them in debt. So Paris decides he's going to chip away at his debt and get a second job, thus beginning his arc as an Amazon delivery man. We get both huffs and puffs over the annoying customers and the totally sucky workload. Eventually, Paris ends up at the house of a seductive fox whose husband is away for the weekend. She tries to tempt him, he's completely disinterested, the scene drags, it gets an illustration. I had such confusion over who this scene was for or who this appeals to. We already know that the protagonist is gay, we don't need to see him turning down a willing female partner to establish this. She acts like an adult film stereotype, but the fact that it doesn't lead anywhere isn't challenging the audience or particularly compelling. We're shown a stereotype that goes nowhere and scene. I know this could be workshopped into a joke. The horned up, lonely housewife encountering the only delivery boy that has no interest in her is a decent enough setup for a comedy skit. But before we can think of a way to work this into our Type 5, we learn the next delivery is to Porte the Skunk's house, ruh-roh. There's more back and forth, more non-conning from Porte. Paris reflects on his seriously messed up mixed feelings for his bully turned assaulter, and it is wild that he can't just imagine his brother and get over it. And just when you think Paris' luck couldn't get any worse, Porte the Bully gets a job at the Amazon factory. Let me read you some of their delightful banter. "So you like sorting packages?" Porte asked with a grin. "That's meant as an innuendo." Really? Glad you spelled that out for me, Porte. "Porte, if you're gonna have a job here, at least do the work." Paris grumbled. "I am," Porte said. He tapped his own vest. "Floor supervisor. I'm supervising." Paris stuttered. Porte leaned into his ear. "You could play ball, or you could keep breaking the rules like a naughty bunny." "Hey," Paris waved him off. "Whatever!" They're gonna keep adding exclamation marks. I guess I gotta start yelling more. End quote. This escalates to another non-con scene, and Paris gets to start his delivery route, and he sure isn't happy about it. We get a little insight into his mind. Paris set the brake on the delivery van. He slumped over the wheel, his ears flopping onto the dash. He couldn't get the experience out of his head. It was so tempting, but it was humiliating. It wasn't what he wanted. Porte wasn't who he wanted. But what were the odds of Paris getting what he wanted at this point? Settling what felt like a decent second-place option was just... ... Paris sighed and looked straight up the hill. This one was steep, and yet still had houses lining it all the way up the slope. Place so skewed that their sub-basements had outward-facing windows. He unlocked the brakes and attempted the climb, but his tires squealed, and the van slid all the way back down to the level street below. "Stupid piece of junk!" Paris kicked the nearly bald, offending tires. The tires did not respond, save to bounce his foot back to the way it came and collide with his knee. Paris grumbled, got up, dusted his tush off, and reached into the back for the package. End quote. So Paris sulks and goes to his next delivery, and holy moly, but this package is for Sultan, his kangaroo crush. Paris gets a nosebleed and passes out, so Sultan takes him inside and feeds him a home-cooked meal. This is also the scene I mentioned earlier. This is where Sultan expresses how Pit Fighter sucks, even for him. He also gives Paris some advice for how to handle Porte the Bully and BT Dubs. Between all of the non-conning, Porte keeps trying to rope Paris into his gang. They have a whole system where they throw fights to help their ranking. The intricacies don't matter, but basically Sultan says that Porte's system is a load of baloney. Anyway, the scene with Sultan shows zero flickerings of sexual or romantic interest. It's more of the vibe of a cool older brother giving the protagonist a talking to. Which also sucks. Since Paris has a huge crush on him, we know this guy is reliably DTF, so this scene is a huge missed opportunity. It's just more black pill doomerism on why pit fighters is secretly bad. As if that wasn't the thesis statement for books 1 and 2, they keep telling me this like they're afraid I'm going to forget it. So Paris goes back to work at the Amazon warehouse and he learns he's been fired for getting a spooge everywhere, which is totally unfair, since that was all Porte the bully's fault. So Paris gets into a scuffle with Porte, which leads to Paris getting arrested. Paris' cellmate is a genderbent Kabai the hippo, but it's not like that matters because nothing spicy comes of this scene either, which is just incredible. Our protagonist is dodging advances left and right in the all-male, all-gay pit fighters campus, and it is consistently met with a huff and a, I don't wanna, okay fine, let's put him in prison, the birthplace of situational homosexuality, convenience gay, and gay for the stay. Maybe here, the story can advance into an actual gay fantasy and start to have a little bit of fun. But nope, Paris is still the same sourpuss as always. He's in an especially bad mood since being arrested means he'll miss his first tournament, but luckily, he gets bailed out by Sultan. When he's checked out, he's given a bag of his belongings, including Sultan's book, which includes a personal note from the kangaroo himself. The text reads, he removed the book from the bag and opened up the front cover. Hey champ, I figured I might have sounded a Tsukoshi discouraging, plus you forgot your book, so I went to see your fight tonight. You didn't show up. I poked around a bit and learned that you'd been fired, scuffled with one of the other greens, and got stuck in jail. I can't say I'm not a little disappointed, but then again, I know a setup when I see one. I convinced Dinah to only drop your score by a normal loss amount. Take this opportunity to prove me right, because at the very least, I want to believe you're a good kid who acted a bit foolish. You might be curious because I said I wasn't going to help you out with money, but there isn't a single fighter worth his salt that hasn't made mistakes. It shows you have spirit. While I'm big on self-reliance, even I know we got to get a little outside help once in a while. Wendell. P.S. Not citing my stage name, because I don't want you selling this for cash. You're not a bum. You're a fighter. Act like it. I want to see improvement in you next time we meet. It's a little condescending that Sultan thought I'd sell a signature for money, Paris exclaimed once back in the bunk room. Side note, Paris exclaimed. Like, that's not what he's constantly doing. Okay, I don't want to draw too much attention to this, so I'll just keep a counter in the corner every time this excerpt specifically ends with an exclamation mark. Okay, anyway, back to the story. Would you? Kinny asked, sitting on the bed across from Paris's. Paris opened his mouth to speak, then scrubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Well, I might consider it, but probably not. Logan looked at the open book over Paris's head from the bunk above. His name is Wendell? That's what I asked. So, what now? Kinny asked. You lucked out and made an impression on the most famous fighter on the island who saved your score from the slag heap. Got a second chance. Gonna get another job? Maybe later, Paris said, but Porte's just going to keep shadowing me until I give in. Well, I won't. I'm done with being shy about this. I need to focus on beating Porte before anything. And if I lose, at least I'll lose fighting him. A talk with the king of the fighters and a night in the slammer seems to have done you wonders, Kinny noted. Paris muttered. That's personal growth. That's all on me. This is my doing. Kinny nodded with a cynical stare. Paris glared at Kinny for a long moment. Who was this little punk to decide that Paris was stagnant, anyhow? So, Kinny finally said, leaning back on his palms, is Sultan just as hot in person? God, yes, Paris exclaimed. He'd better mean it about meeting up again sometime. Otherwise, I'm gonna... Until your falls off? Not necessarily. End quote, and end of book 3. Alright, so I already went over how book 4 starts. We get a training montage. Paris is surprised to find that he likes working out, and he has no idea why. And the adventure trio of Paris, Logan the deer, and Kinny the possum go to Paris's childhood home for the weekend. On the ride there, they get into a conversation about Sultan. Logan grinned. Oh my gosh, you're just always so adorable when you talk about Sultan. I mean, in this league, it's not out of the question, Kinny said. He seemed to like you. Next time you meet, maybe you'll... That's not the problem. Paris pulled his hands away from the strap for a second half to gesture his frustration, only to have it taken up by another commuter who was paying attention. He let it go and stood up strapless. I don't want to. I might just be pretending, but I want him to be there for me. It's not even about the it's... Right, Kinny stated. And comfort are correlated. You're equating Sultan with your chance at comfort, and this excites your lower brain. Paris glared at Kinny. You have a way of explaining nice things in the driest way possible. Sorry, Kinny said, his ears wilting, even if it was only an inch. It's my demeanor. I'm actually an emotional guy. I just repress it as a coping mechanism, since in my family, it's a sign of weakness. Oh, Paris rubbed his arms. Sorry. That's just a fact. Kinny shrugged. You examine your life from the outside for long enough, you see patterns people miss about themselves. Hence why, for some unfathomable reason, I've been playing your psychiatrist for the past month. Paris planted his hands on his hips. So, as my psychiatrist, you think I need to find someone other than Sultan? I'm not saying you should give up on Sultan, but maybe you can find some satisfaction besides your obvious infatuation with a figure that's miles above you. Paris had considered it. He had considered it a lot. He couldn't live around a barracks filled with hot, sweaty, fit-bodied guys having ball-slapping with each other all the time and not think about it. And he'd questioned, many times, why he was so hesitant. The answer he'd come up with was stupid. He knew it was stupid. But society had brought him up to kinda, sorta, maybe think about his potential love life in a certain way. And the thought of breaking away from that caused him more anxiety than he cared to admit. It just feels wrong, Paris said, like I'd be cheating on him. Logan tilted his head, and his ears flopped. Is that why you haven't had sex with anyone since you arrived? Save that one time with Porte, of course, but Paris wanted to bury that memory so deep it'd end up on Satan's coffee table. Well, kinda. Paris rubbed the back of his neck. I guess I've been saving myself for Sultan. Kinny and Logan both exchanged glances, and then both broke out into a fit of giggles. Oh, what do you know? Paris slapped at both of their exposed bodies. Do you know how many guys someone like Sultan has with in a week? Logan asked. That doesn't matter to me, Paris exclaimed. I could be, maybe one of them. How do you think that'll satisfy you? Kinny said, taking up 1/30th of Sultan's attention, like you'll be his favorite harem boy. Paris sank. Maybe. He shrugged as the wheels of the streetcar squealed, and everyone leaned in with the braking as it slowed down for its stop at Lowtown. I know, I'm kind of stupid like that. End quote. Okay, this section was interesting. Other than the part in the beginning where Kinny says directly why he acts the way he does, that was solidly dorky. But it's cool we could finally see more of Paris opening up and explaining why he is the worst lead for a raunchy gay story. This is also an interesting motivation. I know my suggested rewrite made him borderline yandere, but if the audience was sooner clued into why he's abstaining from all of the corny with an H activities, there would be way more of a reason to root for the protagonist and he'd have a clear motivation guiding him. He's saying no because he wants to sleep with Sultan. That's interesting. You can do something with that. One of my big complaints has been this is a story where Protag-kun gets swatted around with no agency, but what if after each gosh darn terrible thing that happens to him, he stands up, brushes himself off, and thinks, well, that sucked, but I still need to beat Sultan and get him to love me. I know there's something there. It's just taken the story way too long to realize what that is. So the gang goes to Paris's childhood home, they eat dinner, hang out, Paris and Kinny practice fight in the backyard, everyone sleeps over, and Kinny the possum sleeps with one of Paris's brothers. The brother's girlfriend walks in on them, breaks up with him on the spot, and she leaves. Now, this next part was easily the best part of the entire series, so let me share this with you. Kinny! Paris hissed, grabbing the possum by his arms and dragging him down the stairs. Kinny let him, as he allowed Blitz to smack him in the back of the head, but Kinny was delirious from the vigorous activity. Paris took him to the empty floor of the house so he could make sure no one overheard his next words, as he was at actual risk of shouting them at the top of his lungs. Kinny! He said in the possum's face, trying to keep his scream to a hushed whisper. What was that about? What? Kinny withdrew, not even looking Paris in the eye as he folded his arms. You're my brother? I said he was gay, Kinny replied quietly. It's not my fault people don't listen when I'm right. Okay, side note, can I fight Kinny on this? The brother had a girlfriend. Can I headcanon him as bisexual, or is that bad since he cheated? Either way, I don't see him as gay. Anyway, the story continues. Paris swabbed his palms over his face. While it had been an open suspicion, Paris never expected such rapid confirmation of the fact. But that wasn't the point. I didn't bring you here so you could my family. What should I do, Paris? Kitty asked, his eyes snapping up to meet his. Do even you know people around you have lives of their own? You know why I started to talk to you, right? You were the only one miserable enough to listen to me, even reluctantly. You keep harping about how everyone else at the FEC is having sex all the time. Do you even keep track? Do you know how many partners I've had there? Paris blinked. No, I haven't. I just assumed. Just 2, not counting sexual favors I paid. No one else likes me. But I have needs, Paris. Blitz has needs, and he's too dumb to realize the consequences while you, meanwhile, are still pretending you're better than that. I thought you'd loosen up after you met Sultan, but you're pretending even more, like you're making some noble sacrifice to leave your friends down and dry. So what? You're my brother because I haven't said you could me? Kinny grabbed Paris by the shoulders and shoved him into the wall. It was a gentle gesture, given how strong Paris knew the opossum was. I'm trying to tell you I like you, imbecile, Kinny said. The moonlight from the window caught Kinny's eyes as they wetted with tears. I've been trying to tell you it's not about having with whoever's is available. I'm not saying I want you to give up on your morals. You're still trying to figure out what they are. And you know, sometimes I'm standing over here feeling unsure how to say to you that I want to hug you and kiss you. And it feels so weird coming out of my mouth rather than, just doing it. He released Paris and slumped backwards. We're probably not even compatible long term. We're very different people, but I know you well enough. You need someone, even if it's temporary. Or would you rather keep all of your encounters every time Porte seduces you? Paris winced. He understood that part well enough. He just wasn't used to thinking with his brain anytime he wasn't horny. But that was Paris's future if he didn't change. Paris slouched. I don't like the idea of temporary. I want security again. Kinny reached out and took Paris's hands in his. His naked fingers were warm and smooth, and Kinny's expression, though still placid, was no longer unreadable. Had Kinny been missing security too? Was that why Kinny joined the pit fighters in the first place? Paris, outside of family, we're the best security we got for each other. Don't throw away a couple of months just because it's not years. Paris blushed. It wasn't a proposal or anything, but maybe it didn't need to be. Paris couldn't come home every day, but he could see Kinny every day, and Kinny very much fit in this place. He seemed, even in the pale moonlight, like a bit of color that Paris thought he'd misplaced. Can you say it again? Paris asked, without the insult this time. I like you, Paris, Kinny said. Paris pulled Kinny close and embraced him. Kinny fell into Paris's body so deeply, so needfully, that Paris thought Kinny might burst into tears. End quote. I want to zoom in on 2 of Kinny's lines. We're probably not even compatible long term. We're very different people, but I know you well enough. You need someone, even if it's temporary. And the second line. Don't throw away a couple of months just because it's not years. Okay, this was interesting. What Kinny's saying is something that a lot of super romantics need to hear, and this being what flips the switch for Paris makes so much sense. I love this, and the line, don't throw away a couple of months just because it's not years, applies to a lot of relationships. I know the advice is thrown around a lot, no relationship's better than a bad relationship, and this typically applies to someone debating if they should break up with their partner, so it's interesting seeing a sort of inverse to this, hearing that it's okay to get into a short-term relationship, knowing that it won't be forever and you aren't soulmates. This is a sentiment I fully support, and I'm happy with the way the story expresses this idea. I can also imagine if a reader does relate to Paris, this is the kind of message they might need to hear. My only problem is that this happens so late in the series, we can't really see what comes of this revelation. And there's a lot of cool ways this could go. Would Paris then try to mold Kinny into being monogamous so they're a better match? And he tries to turn it into something long-term. How would Paris' protagonist feel if he got the chance to with Sultan now that he's had the shift in perspective? What if Paris got exactly what he wanted? What if Sultan wants to be strictly monogamous with Paris, but now his mind is open to polyamory and short-term flings? I really wish this scene happens sometime in books 2 or 3. After this confession scene, since Paris is over his hang-ups, we get a raunchy scene between Paris, Kinny, and Logan, and in the morning, Paris tells his mom about how pit fighters are seriously messed up, and we're hit with a to be continued. So I started this review with the intent of trying to suss out who would enjoy this series. It has overwhelmingly positive reviews on Goodreads, so I guess it's found its target audience of directionless anxiety gays who relate to Paris. Hopefully I didn't upset you too hard. If you enjoyed this series, that's fine. I guess now's the time to tack on the disclaimer that if you enjoyed this book, there's nothing wrong with that. It just really wasn't for me. And if you yourself relate to Paris, I'd love to hear what you like about him or what you would change in a potential rewrite. I just ask that if you are inspired to make a Pit Fighters rewrite, please take some Magic Mind before you get started. Just because your protagonist is unfocused and directionless doesn't mean you need to suffer with that too. Over at magicmind.com/taperclipjan20, my code taperclipjan20 will get you up to 48% off your first subscription for the next 10 days or 20% off of a one-time purchase. The link is going to be in the description and pinned comment. Thank you, Magic Mind, for sponsoring this video. You guys are the best.